Hi, folks. Thanks for watching my monologue. As you may have heard, there's been a recent run on guns and ammunition. I just wanted to let you know that Guns Etc. is in a 10,200 square foot building which holds a lot of guns. So Guns Etc. is open and has a lot of product. Or you can go to gunsetc.com. That's gunsetc.com. And if you like my monologue, please subscribe to our channel using 960 The Patriot. Well, welcome back and happy April 22nd. Some reflections on current contentions. William F. Buckley would title his speeches Reflections on Current Contentions, which he wrote had the benefit of manifest advantages, putting together several thoughts and items that led to a grander conclusion. I shall try that here. A year ago today, we were talking about Robert Mueller and his report to Congress. In that report, he found no collusion with Russia. So we spent the next 5 months talking about how there was collusion with Russia. And by we, I mean the Democrats and the media. Then we turned on a dime to realize, no, it wasn't Russia. After all, it was Russia's sworn enemy, Ukraine. And that trial, public and congressional, ended 2 months ago, only this past February. That, of course, was not before Donald Trump closed travel from China over concerns about something called the novel coronavirus, which of course prompted Joe Biden to call the president a xenophobe and Nancy Pelosi to go to Chinatown and tell people to come to Chinatown. There was nothing to be afraid of. Bill de Blasio did the same in New York City. One closed the country to travel from China. The mayor of New York and the Speaker of the House encouraged people to go out and circulate in their cities' Chinatowns, calling the president a racist or xenophobe. Of course, there was one other event in this time frame, the State of the Union. Therein, among other things, Donald Trump spoke of fighting the emerging and increasingly concerning coronavirus, which, of course, with that and other things, prompted Nancy Pelosi to publicly shred and rip up that State of the Union because, as she said, that was the appropriate response. Oh, in February, the coronavirus was not mentioned at all in debate among the presidential candidates running for the Democratic nomination in Las Vegas. China came up, the importance of trade and negotiation with it, the virus not once. The country began closing down in March due to the coronavirus. The first to go were schools, large gatherings, social gatherings, churches, synagogues. Along the way, some mayors and governors, as in New York, decided it would be smart to furlough prisoners, several thousand. Over 50 have since engaged in at least one additional criminal offense since they've been released. One meth dealer failed 14 drug tests and didn't show up for 11 required treatment sessions, court records show. Prison, lockup, it's what you do to people to punish them. It is not their natural state. To especially punish them, you put them in isolation or solitary confinement, as Dr. Jasser reminds us. We've done that to the whole country. We let out the guilty and imprison the innocents. Another contention, we shut down businesses and states, but Democrats are upset that we aren't letting in immigrants. The border should be open while the rest of the country, Americans, should be closed and in lockdown. I mentioned schools, 55 million children immediately having their lives changed, their social and educational lives, and their parents. The coronavirus does not kill children. The flu kills more children. As of this writing, 96% more children died from the flu this year than from COVID-19. We closed down the schools for 3% of the problem we have never shut them down for. As Dr. Scott Atlas of Stanford put it, he being the former chief of neuroradiology at Stanford University Medical Center, quote, Americans do not have a significant risk of dying from the coronavirus. In New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic, with more than 1/3 of all U.S. deaths, the rate of death for people 18 to 45 years old is 0.01%, or 11 per 100,000. For people under 18 years old, the rate of death is 0 per 100,000. People are dying because other medical care is not getting done due to hypothetical projections, he writes. Critical health care for millions of Americans is being ignored, and people are dying to accommodate potential COVID-19 patients and for fear of spreading the disease. Most states and many hospitals abruptly stopped non-essential procedures and surgery. That prevented diagnoses of life-threatening diseases like cancer screening, biopsies of tumors now undiscovered, and potentially deadly brain aneurysms. Treatments, including emergency care for the most serious illnesses, were also missed. Cancer patients deferred chemotherapy. An estimated 80% of brain surgery cases were skipped. Acute stroke and heart attack patients missed their only chance for treatment, some dying and many now facing permanent disability. Dennis Prager makes a brilliant point. 47 states other than New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut have less than half the deaths of those 3 states. Now let us imagine that the reverse were true. Imagine that Georgia and North Carolina, 2 contiguous states that, like the New York metro area, have a combined total of 21 million people. Let's assume they had 18,690 COVID-19 deaths, while Metro New York had 858 deaths, the number of deaths in North Carolina and Georgia combined. Do you think the New York metro area would close its schools, stores, restaurants, and small businesses? Would every citizen of the New York area, with the few exceptions of those engaged in absolutely necessary work, be locked in their homes for months? Would New York accept the decimation of their economic and social lives because North Carolina and Georgia, or even more absurdly, Colorado, Montana, or the rest of what New Yorkers regard as flyover country, had 18,960 deaths? Well, they had a mere 858 in New York. It is, of course, possible, but I suspect that anyone with an open mind assumes that New Yorkers would not put up with ruining their economic and social lives and putting tens of millions of people out of work because of coronavirus deaths in North Carolina and Georgia, let alone Montana and Idaho. And for the record, I would have agreed with them. But now, every state may have to contemplate proposals hardly ever considered before, like changing the federal law to possibly declare bankruptcies. James Freeman of the Wall Street Journal provides this. A new commentary in the British medical journal The Lancet warns, suicide is likely to become a more pressing concern as the pandemic spreads and has longer-term effects on the general population, the economy, and vulnerable groups. Signed by numerous doctors engaged in mental health research, the article notes, quote, loss of employment and financial stressors are well-recognized factors for suicide, close quote. It's not so theoretical. Suicide help hotline calls soar in Southern California over coronavirus anxieties is the headline of a report in the Orange County Register. Quote, financial stress, social isolation, health concerns fuel explosion of callers seeking support. Teens hit particularly hard, close quote, notes the subhead. There have been more than 8,000% increase in monthly call volumes at Los Angeles mental health crisis lines. The governor of Michigan, who has imposed confusedly and nonsensical lockdown orders, criticized protesters, comparing them to protesting World War II. Yet, we have now gone through 3.5 years of protests in this country, protesting the president, Donald Trump, comparing him to and calling him Adolf Hitler, who we did fight in World War II. Those protests to the Michigan governor and others on the left were evidently okay. Protests to open our country and to oppose autocratic and arbitrary power are akin to protesting opposition to Hitler, evidently. This brings or requires new definitions of arbitrary and rational. It does, however, give an insight into the thinking of the likes of the governor of Michigan. World War II took tens of millions of lives, 400,000 of them American. It must be that scale, such as the governor of Michigan has in mind and continues to worry about and use in justifying her arbitrary powers. Those numbers, however, are nowhere near anything likely here. Unless you think the worst is always here, for example, that our president is akin to a Hitler or a fascist or an existential threat to our Constitution, or that our world is watching entire ecosystems being destroyed, or that we have roughly 12 years to exist, lest we succumb to climate change. Today being Earth Day, one goes to the official Earth Day website to see this thinking very clearly. It states we face, quote, the most urgent challenge of our time, from climate change to deforestation to species extinction, close quote. Of course, as Steve Haywood reminds, a lot has changed since the first Earth Day 50 years ago. The environment in the United States and in most places around the world, for one thing, is in much better condition than it was in 1970. But from overpopulation that would kill hundreds of millions of people, as predicted famously in the 1970s, to the same of nuclear winter in the 1980s, to this. But of course, jeremiads about America and its role in the world have always been part and parcel of the left and increasingly the Democratic Party. always wanting to think the worst of us. That's why, until this year, the most famous thing Andrew Cuomo ever said was that America was never that great. And why, of course, Al Gore, today, after about 10 years or more of being nowhere, is back in the news. Can we all soon please be rid of these turbulent priests? I'm Seth Leibsohn. We'll be right back.